The highest of highs, the lowest of lows. Let's look back on the most memorable Jets games of the last quarter century today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, June 17th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On our podcast, we don't really get many opportunities to talk about Jets history, and that's because we're really focused on the news of the day. But it is a quiet time in the NFL calendar. There's not really much Jets news happening. So over the next couple of weeks, I want to take a look back on the last 25 years because we are now one quarter of the way through the 21st century in the NFL. I know we've completed seasons through 2024, but you have to remember there was a year 2000 and an NFL season in the year 2000, which means we have completed 25 of the 100 seasons in the NFL in the 21st century. So I want to take some time to look back on the last 25 years of Jets football. And I'm going to begin by looking back at the 10 best wins and the 10 worst losses over the next several days. And these aren't always going to be about the win, a playoff win or a loss that ended the season. I'm looking back for games that were really memorable, games that either thrilled you or broke your heart. And I decided to do these both together because if I did an episode with just the best wins and just the worst losses, nobody would want to listen to the worst losses one. So we're going to do them together, and we're going to begin today. Now, before we get to the top 10, I picked some honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list, but were still memorable. So we're going to start off by going through that. So let's start with honorable mention loss. And the first one I'm going with is 2019. The Jets lost in Miami to the then 0-7 Dolphins. And this was Adam Gase's first year. When Gase was hired, it was a pretty unpopular move in the fan base. There was a lot of skepticism, both in the fan base and the media, and rightly so, because Gase had just failed in Miami. And the Jets got off to a terrible start that season. They only had one win at that point, which was a game where they kind of caught the Dallas Cowboys by surprise in the first three quarters. And people knew the Jets were a bad team. But this game really took it to the next level because this was a Dolphins team that wasn't just winless. People were talking about that Dolphins team as being perhaps the worst team in modern NFL history. And the Jets went down to Miami and lost to them. The Jets offense looked sloppy. Sam Darnold threw a terrible interception on the goal line. Then the Jets couldn't even, because of a shotgun snap, they couldn't execute that late in the game. They took a safety. A really hideous loss by the New York Jets. And a game that really just cemented that Adam Gase was not going to pan out as Jets head coach. Honorable mention for best wins. I'll start with week 1 of 2023, the Jets overtime win over the Buffalo Bills. And this was the game Aaron Rodgers got injured after 4 offensive snaps. And we didn't know at the time for certain that he had suffered an Achilles injury, but it seemed like there was a real possibility that it was a very serious injury. And there was already a lot of speculation that he had torn his Achilles tendon and would miss the rest of the season. The Jets in this game rallied from 10 down. They got off to a bad start because I think the team was so shell-shocked by Rodgers' injury. And they rallied from a 10-point deficit in the fourth quarter. They actually took the lead late in the fourth quarter. Buffalo tied it a last-second field goal, but then Xavier Gipson ran back a punt in overtime to win it. And even though the 2023 season did not go very well for the New York Jets, that will always be a lasting memory for me. The Jets responding to adversity, losing their starting quarterback. And you have to remember that was an off season full of a lot of excitement, a lot of anticipation. And like 4 plays in, you lose the player that got you the most excited. Jets shook it off and managed to get a great win over an elite Buffalo Bills team. Even though the season didn't go the way we wanted it to, it was still pretty special. Next honorable mention loss. The 2022 loss to the Minnesota Vikings. Jets lost that game 27-22 in Minnesota. They got off to a terrible start. They were down 20-3 at one point, and they just kept chipping away. Field goal after field goal, Greg Zuerlein kick after Greg Zuerlein kick. The Jets finally got the score to 27-22 and had a second and goal on the 1 yard line late in the fourth quarter and got stopped 3 times. Bam Knight got stopped once on the goal line. Then Two passes were thrown for incompletions, including one that hit Braxton Berrios in the hands that he dropped. And this wasn't just a loss. This was a loss that sent the Jets down into a tailspin at the end of the season. They were 7-4 going into the game. They finished 7-10. So it was the first loss in a 6-game losing streak to end the season. If Berrios holds on to that ball, they go to 8-4, and who knows how the rest of the season plays out. So it's kind of like the loss that really kind of sent them into a bad place. Honorable mention wins: the 2004 wild card game against the San Diego Chargers. The Jets went out to San Diego and beat the Chargers in overtime. It was a game where they were pretty big underdogs. The Chargers were the AFC West champions, a star-studded roster with Drew Brees at quarterback, LaDainian Tomlinson at running back, Antonio Gates' breakout season at tight end. On the defensive side of the ball, they had Sean Marion. Not many people gave the Jets a chance in that game, in part because the Jets really struggled near the end of the season. They entered the game on a two-game losing streak, a terrible loss to the New England Patriots week 16. Then week 17, they went out to St. Louis to play the Rams and lost, and only made the playoffs because the Steelers beat the Bills. The Jets kind of backed their way into the playoffs that year. Chad Pennington was playing injured, but the Jets took control of the game early on. They had a 10-point lead in the second half. Then with the Chargers driving for the tying score late in the fourth quarter, the Jets defense put together an epic goal line stop. It was a goal line stand that would live on in Jets lore forever, if not for one really bad play. Is that when the Jets got the stop on fourth down, linebacker Eric Barton hit Drew Brees in the head and drew a roughing the passer call, the play that would have won the Jets the game. The next play, the Chargers scored to tie it. They forced overtime. Then the Chargers started moving the ball at will on a gassed Jets defense, and Marty Schottenheimer, the Chargers head coach, just decided to play for a long field goal, which Chargers kicker Nate Kading missed. The Jets had new life. They drove the ball down the field, and Chad Pennington got Doug Bryan into chip shot range, and Bryan connected. Bryan would be the GOAT a week later in a game we'll talk about later in this series. But a really inspiring Jets win over the Chargers in 2004. Honorable mention worst losses, 2024 against the New England Patriots. You may remember this game. Jets were 2-5 going into it. The season was probably over, but I don't think we realized how bad things were going to get. At that point, the Jets were looking like, a team like the 2011 Eagles or the 2000 Washington team with a very high expectations, with a lot of star-studded lineup that would be mediocre. That game showed us that when they lost to the awful Patriots, it showed us that the Jets were going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL. We weren't just heading for a 7-8 win season. We were heading for a 4-5 win season. That's what Jets ended up with 5 games. They let a backup quarterback, Jacoby Brissett, drive down the field twice in the fourth quarter for go-ahead scores. Greg Zuerlein missed a field goal and an extra point. The Jets wasted 4 timeouts on offense. The offense could not generate the big play that they needed. It was just a really ugly performance by the New York Jets and emblematic of a lost season. Honorable mention best wins, week 2, 2022 against the Cleveland Browns. That was the game where the Jets were down 10 late in the fourth quarter. Nick Chubb scored what seemed to be a touchdown that would ice the game with just under 2 minutes left. Then the Jets scored a long touchdown as Joe Flacco hit Corey Davis on a busted coverage. They recovered the onside kick. Flacco drove them down the field for the game-winning touchdown. He hit Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's 8th and final catch on the game, his second touchdown. It was Garrett Wilson's breakout game, his second game in the NFL. The 2022 season wasn't defined by it. 2022 season was defined by an October winning streak and the aforementioned December losing streak, but still a very exciting game for the New York Jets. Worst loss, honorable mention, 2011 in Denver. This was a Thursday night game. It was the famous Tebow game where the offense really struggled. I feel bad for the Jets defense in that game, because everybody remembers Tebow driving the ball down the field, but the defense was exhausted because the offense couldn't generate anything. Mark Sanchez threw a terrible pick six, and then the defense the only time the Broncos moved the ball all night on the Jets was that final drive when the defense was exhausted playing Thursday night at altitude. A ill-advised blitz. Eric Smith did not contain on the outside. Tebow broke contain and scored a touchdown. Just a disaster. Honorable mention best wins. Week 17, 2009 against the Cincinnati Bengals. This was a win-and-in game for the New York Jets. They were playing a Bengals team that had clinched the AFC North title, and the Jets went out there and dominated the Bengals. They won the game 30-0. It was a complete domination. The Jets earned a playoff spot. It was a tremendous performance. And then they went out to Cincinnati the next week and beat the same Bengals team again in the wild card round. Really a fantastic game for the New York Jets. Honorable mention worst losses, 2020 against the Raiders. This was the famous Greg Williams 0 blitz game where with under 15 seconds left in the fourth quarter. Greg Williams, the defensive coordinator, calls a zero blitz, and they leave a undrafted rookie Lamar Jackson out on an island, and he gets beat for a long touchdown on a Hail Mary. And just a story that an emblematic play for the 2020 Jets. Honorable mention best wins. 2006 in New England. This was Eric Mangini's first year. They went up to New England on a rainy Sunday. Came up with a really interesting game plan. They really confused Tom Brady with some exotic blitzes, and a Jets team that was projected preseason to be one of the worst teams in the league upset the Patriots and went on to make the playoffs. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to move into our top 10 best wins and worst losses. We're going to talk about a trip to Miami in 2011 and a game at home against Dallas in that same year. That's ahead here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the NBA Finals, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live. And this year's matchup is delivering. If you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. If you can make it to Oklahoma City or Indianapolis, Game Time is the place to get your NBA Finals tickets. But anywhere you want to go, whether it's a sports event, baseball in New York, a comedy show, theater, a concert, Game Time has you covered. I use Game Time myself. I love it. I love how they give you the price before you buy, no hidden fees. You know exactly what you pay before you click buy. They also give you the view from your seat. They give you a picture of what it's going to look like from your seat, so no surprises, no obstructed views you weren't expecting. And here's the thing about NFL tickets. You'll find great seats for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts on Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. Locked On NFL. It's one word with no space for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we're beginning a look back at the last 25 years of Jets football. We are now through the first quarter century of the 21st century. We've played 25 of the 100 NFL seasons in the 21st century. So we're looking back at the best Jets wins and the worst Jets losses. And as I said earlier, the best wins aren't all going to be playoff games. Some of them are just really super memorable games. The worst losses, again, they aren't all going to be the games that eliminated the Jets. They were just losses that were particularly painful. So we'll start. My number 10 loss was the Week 17 finale in 2011 in Miami against the Dolphins. And this came a week after the famous Jets lost to the Giants on Christmas Eve, which we'll get to in that game, the Victor Cruz game. And that one will appear later in our list. It's higher than number 10. The Jets woke up on that Sunday. They were still mathematically alive for the playoffs, but it was you knew that the team wasn't that good. They needed a lot of help to make it. They needed to beat Miami, which you knew going in was not going to be an easy task for how poorly that Jets team was playing. And you also knew that even if they made the playoffs, they probably weren't going very far. This was a Jets team coming off back-to-back AFC Championship game berths, but it was clear that the 2011 team wasn't as good. And this was a really ugly performance. I mean, Mark Sanchez threw some just brutal interceptions in this game, and it was part of an end of season 2011 collapse for Sanchez. I mean, I think by the end of you could have talked yourself into Sanchez about halfway through the 2011 season. For the first 2 years, the Jets went to the AFC Championship game twice. So you could say, even though Sanchez wasn't playing that great, the team was winning. But halfway through the season, Sanchez you could just tell that things were moving in a really negative direction for him. This was also the game where Santonio Holmes quit. Holmes was the big signing in the offseason that year. He was already with the Jets. It was a re-signing, but Rex Ryan made him a team captain. He was just a really bad presence in the locker room. He was the antithesis of a team captain. He finally just got kicked out of the huddle in the last series when the Jets. The game was pretty much over. You knew the Jets were going to lose, but it was just a really ugly ending to a really ugly season. In fact, if you combine my my lists, both the honorable mention and my top 10 list, 2011 season appears 3 times. We've been through 2 of them: the Tebow game and the game in Miami. And you probably know what the third game is going to be. I already told you what it is. That'll be later in the list. My number 10 best win was the opener of that season. It was the game against the Dallas Cowboys. It was a Sunday night game. The Jets were chosen to opened the season with a home game on Sunday Night Football. They were coming off the back-to-back AFC Championship game berths. The game also had special significance because this game took place on September 11th, 2011, the 10th anniversary of September 11th, 2001. And the Jets faced the Dallas Cowboys. Jets got off to a rough start in this game. They were down by 14 at the start of the fourth quarter, but they rallied back. Sanchez touchdown pass to Plaxico Burress, and then Joe McKnight blocked a punt in the about a little over halfway through the fourth quarter that Isaiah Trufant returned for a touchdown. The most pivotal play of the game came late in the fourth quarter. It was tied. Darrelle Revis picked off Tony Romo, and Revis undercut a back shoulder throw attempt by Romo. Earlier in the game, Romo had hit Bryant on a back shoulder pass against Revis, but on that play, the Jets disguised their coverage. They showed cover one pre-snap, which meant Revis was not going to have safety help. So you can't really undercut a back shoulder throw if you don't have safety help because nobody's back to help you if you miss. But the Jets actually rolled into cover two coverage, which meant Revis did have safety help, which allowed him to kind of jump the route. He picked it off. Nick Folk connected from 50 yards for the game-winning field goal, and the Jets had a very emotional win to open their 2011 season. All right, let's move on now. Worst losses. Week 16, 2000 against the Detroit Lions. 2000 season was a really wild one for the Jets. They got off to a 6-1 start, and through week 15, they were 9-4, through week 14, they were 9-4, and they actually had an outside shot at the one seed in the AFC playoffs, but they got crushed by the Raiders on Sunday Night Football week 15, a Raiders team that was very good that went on to win the AFC West. The Jets returned home week 16 with a chance to clinch a playoff berth with a win over the Detroit Lions. The Jets were up 7-3 in the fourth quarter, and then the Lions were driving, and there was the fumble in the end zone that was recovered by an offensive lineman for Detroit. The Jets rallied. They got into field goal range, and John Hall missed a 35-yarder that would have sent the game into overtime. The Jets lost to fall to 9-6. Then the next weekend, they had to go down to Baltimore and face the 2000 Ravens. They went down, got off to a good start in that game, but ended up being beaten pretty handily. But if you look at the 3-game stretch that ended their season, they lost 3 straight games. One was to a very good Raiders team. Another was to the Ravens team that went on to win the Super Bowl with their all-time defense. The game they really let get away, the game that cost them the playoffs, was that Week 16 game against the Detroit Lions. They were in control for most of the game. They were ahead. They were leading deep into the fourth quarter, and again, they lost on like a fluky fumble, and then John Hall missed a chip shot field goal that would have sent the game to overtime. This season doesn't get remembered. It was a really wild season because, again, the Jets got off to a 6-1 start. Then they collapsed at the end of the season. Their head coach left. Al Groh quit to go coach at the University of Virginia. But really, really tough loss. Our number 9 win, well, it came from earlier in that season, the flashlight game when the Jets beat the Buccaneers week 4 in Tampa Bay. And I think there are probably going to be 2 responses to this game making the list, and it'll depend on whether you were rooting for the Jets 25 years ago. Those of you who were Jets fans 25 years ago are probably saying, oh, yeah, good call. And those of you who were not Jets fans 25 years ago are probably wondering, what's the flashlight game? Well, Keyshawn Johnson had been traded from the Jets to Tampa Bay that offseason. And from 1996 through 1999, Keyshawn Johnson and Wayne Corbett were the Jets' top 2 receivers, but they had somewhat of an acrimonious relationship, and it seems like a lot of it came from Keyshawn. Keyshawn wrote a book shortly after his career started, where he referred to Corbett as the team mascot. And these were 2 guys who had very opposite stories. Keyshawn was the guy from the glamour program USC, and he was the number 1 overall pick in the draft. Corbett was the small school kid who was a non-drafted free agent who made the team. Keyshawn was an enormously physically talented. Corbett was small and scrappy. They were kind of an odd couple when they were Jets' top receivers. And, Keyshawn frequently was critical of Corbett. Keyshawn got traded that offseason to Tampa Bay over a contract dispute. And you may remember that you've probably heard a lot about the Jets' famous 2000 draft class, how they had 4 first-round picks. 2 of the first-round picks came from Tampa Bay in the Keyshawn trade. When the week leading up to the game, Keyshawn was asked to compare himself to Corbett. He said, "I'm like a star. Corbett's a flashlight. A star shines forever. Flashlights burn out." Well, in this game, the Jets were down 17-6 late in the fourth quarter. They scored a touchdown just around the 2-minute warning. They kicked the ball deep because they had 3 timeouts. So they could, if they got a stop, they could force Tampa Bay to call timeout. They could call timeout and force Tampa Bay to punt. Well, the Bucs ended up fumbling the ball away. And the Jets dialed up a halfback pass from Curtis Martin to Wayne Corbett. And Martin hit Corbett for the game-winning touchdown in the final 2 minutes. Fournette, who had been criticized that week as the flashlight, caught the game-winning touchdown. Keyshawn had 1 catch for 1 yard in that game. A very sweet win for the New York Jets. Now, after the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to turn our attention to a couple Jets games against the Indianapolis Colts. Jets have had some joy against the Colts. Jets have had some pain against the Colts. We'll talk about both as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Tuesday. Today we are talking about the best wins and worst losses the Jets have had in the last 25 years. So we continue on our list. The number 8 worst loss, I'm going with the Thanksgiving night game in 2012 against the New England Patriots. It was a brutal performance by the Jets. They lost 47-17, and that was the night of the famous butt fumble when Mark Sanchez scrambled. It was a busted play because Sanchez forgot which side he was supposed to hand off to. So he ended up in the backfield. He took off and then ran into Brandon Moore, fumbled the ball away. The Patriots returned it for a touchdown. And Chris Collinsworth gave some of the worst analysis of that play you'll ever hear on NBC's broadcast. He blamed Brandon Moore for it. He made it sound like Vince Wilfork threw Brandon Moore into Sanchez. If you watch that play, it's clear Sanchez just like kind of botched it. And it was a lot of bad luck involved, for the play to turn out like that. I've always felt like the Jets kind of, in a weird way, caught a break with that because that was part of a span in just over a minute where the Jets allowed touchdowns on offense, defense, and special teams. Right before the butt fumble, Shane Vereen burned Bart Scott on a wheel route for an 85-yard touchdown. Then the butt fumble, the Patriots returned a kickoff, or the Patriots returned the fumble for the touchdown. The Jets then fumbled the ensuing kickoff, which Julian Edelman scooped up and scored a touchdown. So a game that was 7-0 in the span of about a minute became 28-0 New England. The total laugher, ugly performance, and just bizarre coaching by the Jets because that night, and this is another thing people forget, Rex Ryan was asked why he didn't bench Sanchez because Sanchez was playing really bad. And Rex's response was, well, this was the year Tebow was on the team. Rex's response was, well, Tebow was our only active quarterback and he was too injured to play, which raises the question of like why he would be active if he was too injured to play. I mean, just a night to forget for the New York Jets. But there was a much happier moment against the New England Patriots at home 3 years later, and that's my number 8 best win. That was the 2015 win by the Jets over the Patriots in Week 16. This was Todd Bowles' first season. This was the only successful season the Jets had with Todd Bowles as their head coach. And to keep their playoff hopes alive, they had to beat the Patriots at home in Week 16. And this was a game where the Jets got off to a good start. But, when you were going up against New England in the Brady days, you always knew that, like, no lead was safe. Jets got off to an early 2-score lead. And then the Patriots put together a touchdown drive late in the fourth quarter to force overtime. The Jets won the coin toss in overtime. And the pivotal play of this game, of the overtime, was Ryan Fitzpatrick hitting Quincy Enunwa in the left flat and Enunwa taking the ball down the field into scoring range. Fitzpatrick then hit a perfect pass to Brandon Marshall, and the next play he hit Eric Decker for a touchdown. This was the last time the Jets had a winning record, and it was also the last time the Jets were even alive heading into Week 17. It was the last time it really felt like the Jets were ever seriously threatening for a playoff spot. So this game has a special spot in my heart because we haven't seen the Jets be good since that game. And the next week they went up to Buffalo, lost a really bad game to the Bills, which we'll talk about later in our worst losses list. But anyway, our number 7 worst loss is the 2009 AFC Championship game to the Indianapolis Colts. This was a game the Jets got off to a good start. They were up 17-6 in the second quarter, and they just couldn't really get anything going after that. The Colts ended up just kind of wearing the Jets down. The Colts offense, which struggled early in the game, got going. Jets offense stalled in the second half. The key to me, there were 2 key moments in this game, and they were both injuries. The Jets lost Sean Green early in the second half, and they also lost a corner, Donald Strickland. And Sean Green had kind of a disappointing career overall with the Jets, but near the end of his rookie season in 2009, he looked like he was a budding star. He really kind of took over as the lead back for Thomas Jones, and he was a very productive runner during the Jets playoff run that year. When he left that game, the Jets just couldn't really generate much of anything on offense. And Strickland was a surprise starter in that game over Lito Shepherd, who had been the starter for most of the year for the Jets. But I guess there was something in the matchup Rex Ryan saw, because he put Strickland in the starting lineup. And then when Shepherd went in, he just got picked on over and over and over. This cost the Jets a trip to the Super Bowl. But there are three reasons I don't have this higher on the list. It was painful to lose the AFC Championship game, so it has to be on the list. But there are three kind of mitigating circumstances which leave me unable to put it higher than 8. Number one is the Colts were objectively a better team. The Colts were the best team in the AFC all season long. Nobody thought the Jets were going to win this game. Number two is the Jets really overachieved by making it to the AFC Championship game that year. Before the start of the season, nobody thought the Jets were going to be in the AFC Championship game. So by any measure, the season was a success. So it wasn't as crushing as what would come a year later. And the third aspect of this was, it was the first year of a head coach and quarterback, first year of Rex Ryan, first year of Mark Sanchez. And in the moment, we didn't realize that their window to win a championship would only last 2 years. When you get to the AFC Championship game your first year with a head coach and a quarterback, you assume that you're going to have a long run with these guys, and you assume that you're going to have plenty of chances to come after that. So those were three things that kind of conspired to make it less painful than losing an AFC Championship game normally would have. And the Jets did attain some measure of revenge against the Colts, which is the next year, which is my number 7 win. And that was the 2010 AFC wildcard game where the Jets went back to Indianapolis and beat the Colts on a last-second Nick Folk field goal. This was kind of a wild game. The Jets were down 7-0 at half, and they weren't really able to do much on the offensive side of the ball. And then Brian Schottenheimer made a really good adjustment, which is not something I'd say normally about Brian Schottenheimer during his Jets offensive coordinator days. They just started to run the ball. They just started to lean behind their dominant offensive line. They pounded the football. They ended up taking the lead. And on defense, the Jets did a good job forcing the Colts to field goals. The Colts generated field goals in the second half, but the Jets always got the key stop on third downs. Unfortunately for the Jets, Adam Vinatieri connected in the final minute from 50 yards out to give Indianapolis the lead, and it felt like all was lost. But then Antonio Cromartie broke a big return, and the Jets got into the scoring range. And then Jim Caldwell the Colts head coach called a very ill-advised timeout. The clock was running on a play where the Jets were tackled in bounds. It felt like the Jets were just going to let the clock run down and try a long field goal. Caldwell called a timeout. The Jets went and regrouped, and Braylon Edwards, the wide receiver, said, "Throw me the ball. Like, I'm going to make a big play." And Mark Sanchez hit him down the right sideline to turn the field goal for Nick Folk into a chip shot. And the Jets had a great road playoff win over the Indianapolis Colts. That's all for today's episode. Tomorrow we will continue our list of the top 10 best Jets wins and top 10 worst losses of the 21st century. Until then, I hope you have a great day. I'll chat with you tomorrow.